My name is Helen, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the one who doesn't ruffle feathers. In my family, that meant smiling when I wanted to speak up, offering to bring dessert instead of sharing an opinion, and learning how to nod through conversations that left me aching. I've always known how to stay small in a room that didn't want to make space for me. The backyard was dressed for celebration. Paper lanterns swayed above folding tables. Barbecue smoke drifted lazily across the lawn, and someone had tied a row of blue and gold balloons to the old oak tree near the fence. Everyone seemed to have something in their hands, cups of lemonade plates piled with ribs, cameras held high, except me. I stood with empty hands and full thoughts. Lucas, my son, stood beside me, shifting his weight from foot to foot. He had just turned 18 and received offers from 3 universities. No tutors, no legacy points, no donations. Just him and every night he spent with a highlighter in one hand and a frozen dinner in the other. I watched him scan the yard like he was trying to count how many times he'd been invisible, in this exact place. My brother Joel was laughing too loud near the grill holding court as usual. My sister Caroline had gathered everyone to toast her daughter Natalie, who'd been accepted to Brown. It was her party and the decorations screamed it. Photos of her taped to mason jars, a handmade banner with her name glittering across the deck railing. I wasn't jealous. I was used to the way my family celebrated loudly for some and quietly forgot others. It wasn't new. It just hurt in familiar ways. When I brought Lucas over to say hi to Caroline, she smiled politely, called him the wrong name, and turned back to her friends before he could answer. He didn't flinch. I did. He tugged at his sleeves, a habit from childhood he hadn't outgrown, and looked toward the drink table like maybe he'd find an exit there. I wanted to say something, anything to make that moment less sharp, but all I managed was a soft hand on his back. The same old gesture, the same old silence. People think silence is empty, but it's not. It's crowded with everything you didn't say, everything you swallowed every time you smiled through the sting. And if you do it long enough, people start thinking you're okay. They assume your quiet means peace, not survival. I became quiet out of necessity. Lucas learned it by example. I looked around at the backyard plastic tablecloths flapping in the breeze music, from a Bluetooth speaker humming above the buzz of conversation, and I realized that not one person had asked Lucas where he was going to college. Not even once. They had all heard. I told them in emails and passing conversations, even mentioned it in the family group chat that no one ever responded to. But today was not about him. It never had been. A few neighbors had come by with cards and hugs. One even called him a miracle kid. Lucas smiled, nodded, said, "Thank you." He always knew how to be gracious even when overlooked. I don't know where he learned that because I never taught it. I just modeled the kind of patience that wears you thin. I kept watching him standing there in khakis that were a little too short and a button-down that used to be his father's. He looked grown. More than that, he looked like someone who had spent years being told he had to earn his place. And still, here he was standing beside me, quiet, polite, unnoticed. Sometimes I wondered if the reason I stayed small all those years was because I didn't think I had another option. I thought if I kept the peace, if I made myself agreeable, then one day they'd see me. Turns out you can be in the same room as someone your whole life and they still won't see you. Lucas didn't ask to leave the party, he didn't complain. He just stood beside me with that same stillness he always carried, like he was waiting for something. Not applause, not recognition, just a moment to breathe. And I stood beside him wondering how long I'd been holding my breath too. We were standing near the drink table when I saw my father stacking a plate full of ribs like he always did. His hat still sat neatly on his head, the one that said U.S. Navy across the front. He liked to remind people of that service, as if it made everything else after more honorable. Lucas was beside me, reaching for a soda can, quiet as usual. His shirt had started to untuck a little at the back. I reached over and fixed it without thinking. That was when I asked. The question I'd been holding since we arrived. I kept my voice even, just loud enough to be heard over the music. I asked if Lucas would be getting a share of the college fund. I tried to sound casual, like it wasn't sitting like a stone in my chest, like I hadn't already guessed the answer. My father didn't even look up. He was chewing, pointing his fork towards something on the grill. He muttered the words like they were obvious, like they made sense. Why waste it on him? He's from a broken home. It took a second for the sentence to land, not because I didn't hear it, but because my brain tried to soften it before it reached my heart. I stood there, still holding Lucas's empty soda can. My fingers tightened just slightly, My smile stayed where it was. There are words that don't just hurt, they split you, and that one carved something right through me. I felt the burn start behind my eyes, but I swallowed it down fast. My face stayed calm. I've had years of practice. Lucas didn't flinch. He just paused. His fork hovered for a second above his paper plate, then continued cutting his potato salad like nothing had happened. But I saw the way his shoulders drew in. Just an inch. I knew that movement. It meant he heard every word. I didn't argue. I didn't tell my father how wrong he was or how cruel that sounded in a boy's ear. I didn't point out that Lucas had been accepted to 3 top schools on full merit without one bit of help from any of them. I didn't say that this so-called broken home had been the only place Lucas ever felt safe. I just nodded, smiled, the way I always do. Some people think silence is weakness, but for me, silence was the only way to survive in a family that didn't make room for feelings that didn't fit their story. My siblings were laughing by the grill. Natalie was posing for photos with her banner. No one noticed the moment. No one noticed me. I looked at Lucas. He had moved on to his fruit salad, calm, composed. He didn't look at me, but I could feel him asking something. Not out loud, but with that stillness. That question I feared most. Does he think it's true? And that's when I felt something shift in me. This wasn't about me anymore. Not my hurt, not my disappointment. It was about my son. My kind, brilliant, unseen son. Who had done everything right. Who had worked through grief and hunger and silence. Who had never once asked why his cousins got better gifts or warmer hugs. And now, in front of ribs and lemonade and fake family pride, he was being written off with a sentence. From a broken home. Like that was all he was. I smiled at my father one last time. I said nothing. Just reached over, gently wiped a bit of sauce off Lucas's cheek with a napkin. He looked at me then, just for a second. That was enough. I needed him to see that I saw him, that I always had. The rest of the party passed in a blur. Speeches, cake, family photos I didn't appear in, but my mind kept circling back to that moment. Not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed something I'd spent years trying not to admit. My father was never going to see Lucas for who he was, and the truth was, he never really saw me either. Lucas was born in a hospital room that smelled like bleach and betrayal. I was 24, lying in bed with one hand cradling my newborn son and the other signing the last page of my divorce papers. Daniel had already been gone for 2 months by then. He left while I was still pregnant, said he wasn't ready for a family, never really looked back. I moved back into my parents' house in Maplewood, with nothing but 2 duffel bags, a tired stroller, and a boy who cried like he already knew the world would make him earn his place. My mother Mary met us at the door, her arms wrapped around me, then around Lucas without hesitation. She smelled like cinnamon and fabric softener. She was the only one who welcomed us home like we belonged. My father didn't say much, just glanced up from his newspaper and offered a grunt. My brother Joel gave me a stiff nod and went back to his phone. Caroline stood in the kitchen, arms crossed her eyes, flicking to Lucas with something colder than disapproval. No one said they were disappointed. They didn't have to. The air did that for them. I got a job shelving books at the local library. The hours were long, the pay barely enough to stretch. I brought home dented cans, secondhand clothes, diapers in bulk. Lucas never cried more than he had to, never asked for more than what was in front of him. By the time he was 5, he had learned to wait his turn even when there wasn't a line. When I came home after closing shifts, he'd be on the living room floor with his little legs tucked underneath him, flipping through picture books. He didn't care if the covers were torn or if someone else's name was scrawled on the inside. He read them like they were treasures. I remember walking in once and seeing him tracing the spine of a library discard like it was something sacred. My siblings' kids always had tablets and private tutors. They wore brand new sneakers that lit up when they walked. At birthdays, the cake was 3-tiered with fondant letters spelling out names in bright colors. Lucas never minded his thrift store jeans or store-brand cereal, but he noticed. He always noticed. He was 8 the first time I realized how much he felt. That year, he read every single book in the junior section of our branch library. When I came home late one Friday, I found him sitting on the couch with his knees tucked up and a notebook in his lap. He had written a short story about a boy who could talk to trees but couldn't get anyone else to listen. I sat there and cried quietly as he read it aloud to me. No one in the family ever asked to read what he wrote. At Christmas, stockings were hung for all the kids, except one year, There wasn't one for Lucas. My father said it must have been an oversight, but I saw the way Lucas folded his napkin slowly and didn't touch his food that night. My mother was the only one who truly saw him. She called him her little professor. Even when cancer stole most of her voice, she'd perk up the moment Lucas entered the room. He would read to her from his journal, and she'd nod with closed eyes, smiling, like she was listening to something sacred. We lost her when Lucas was 15. After the funeral, the house felt heavier, like whatever warmth had existed there left with her. My father stopped speaking to me entirely for a while. Caroline acted like nothing had happened. Joel brought a new girlfriend to the memorial and spent the day talking about real estate. Lucas didn't break down. He didn't lash out. He just got quieter. I'd find him at his desk surrounded by notebooks and highlighters, scribbling ideas in the margins of college brochures he found at the library. I knew he was grieving, but he carried it differently. He didn't ask for comfort. He poured it into essays and plans and midnight goals that no one else seemed to notice. We never had much. Just a tiny bedroom, the smell of old books, and my mother's quilt folded neatly at the foot of his bed. But I filled that space with stories, bedtime tales that made him believe in more than what he could see. Because even if the world outside treated him like a shadow, I wanted him to feel solid at home. He never complained when Caroline's kids got new laptops and he typed on my old one with a cracked screen. He didn't protest when birthday parties meant takeout burgers and a cupcake from the corner bakery. Instead, he wrote thank you notes and helped me carry in the groceries without being asked. Lucas never had to be told the world wouldn't hand him anything. He knew. But still, he rose early, he listened, he learned. And when he felt ignored, he didn't shout. He wrote. He filled journals like lifeboats, each page carrying a piece of him somewhere safer. By the time he turned 16, teachers were pulling me aside to ask where he got his mind. I didn't have an answer. I just knew he was born with something too quiet for this family to notice. Something that didn't need noise to be real. Looking back, I realized those years weren't just about survival. They were about shaping someone strong in ways the world doesn't always recognize. Lucas wasn't loud, but he was steady. And from the shadows, he built a light no one saw coming. After my mother died, something in Lucas settled. It wasn't peace, it was focus. A quiet kind of urgency that lived behind his eyes. He stopped leaving notes on the fridge with silly drawings, stopped asking if I'd read his new short story. Instead, he got up earlier, stayed up later. The house became filled with the soft click of keys and the hum of fluorescent light. He didn't cry about her, not even once in front of me, but I knew where the grief went. It poured into essays with titles like The Last Woman Who Saw Me and lined the margins of scholarship forms with ink smudges where his hand had rested too long. Sometimes I'd pass by his room and see him holding his pen, still staring down, like he was listening for something only he could hear. At school, his teachers began emailing me more, not just about grades, but about who he was becoming. His English teacher called him a storm in quiet clothes, said Lucas had a voice that came through strongest when no one expected it. I read those words at midnight with tears caught in my throat. The night of the graduation party, after the food was packed away and the porch lights were off, I found him at the kitchen table, the same table where he used to color while I made boxed mac and cheese. He was sitting perfectly still, the journal in front of him, open but untouched. I sat down beside him, not saying anything, just waited. He didn't look at me when he asked it, just kept his eyes on the page. Do you think what Grandpa said is true? I froze. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I knew how long it must have taken him to ask it. I looked at him, really looked, at his tired eyes and his bitten fingernails, and the way his shoulders were pulled so tightly inward. I reached out, placed my hand over his, and said the only truth I knew. What's broken is how they see the world, not you. He didn't cry. He nodded once and closed the journal. But I saw the way he filed the moment away, the same way he had filed so many others, quietly, carefully, deep inside where no one could touch it. That's when I knew. He wasn't just hurt. He was building something. Over the next few months, I watched him chase opportunities like they were exits. He entered every essay contest, every merit-based scholarship, every free summer writing program he could find online. We didn't have the money to send him to prep classes, but he taught himself. Flashcards, YouTube lectures, free PDFs. He used my old laptop until the keys stuck and the screen flickered. He worked weekends at the grocery store, bagging items for people who never looked up. Came home and studied in the same shirt he'd worn to sweep floors. I tried to make it easier, made late-night grilled cheese, left sticky notes with small reminders that he mattered. But he was already somewhere beyond me, focused, intent, not bitter, just determined. Sometimes I'd hear him whisper lines to himself while brushing his teeth. Half a sentence, a fragment. He carried words like armor, words he was collecting for something bigger than either of us, something he hadn't named yet. One morning, I found an envelope on the table addressed to Lucas Carter. Inside was a letter. He had won a regional essay prize. The paper said his work was honest and deeply felt. I pressed the envelope to my chest before calling him in to read it. He just smiled. Not wide, just enough. Another day, a counselor called from school, said Lucas had something rare, a voice that could move a room without needing to shout. I thanked her, my throat too tight to say more. He still didn't talk much at home, but the silence was different now. It wasn't empty. It was full of intention. I felt it when I walked past his room, saw the light under the door, heard the soft scratch of pen on paper. There was something brewing. We didn't speak about the party again. Not about my father, not about the money that would never come. But I felt the shift. That moment had marked him. Not with defeat, but with direction. Sometimes I'd watch him from the hallway sitting at his desk in that small room that had once been my mother's sewing space, surrounded by pages and open books, his back straight, his jaw set. And I'd think, this is how a boy learns to carry a life that was never made to hold him. He didn't ask for applause. He didn't chase recognition, but I could feel it. Something was coming. A moment, a stage, a reckoning. And when it came, I knew he wouldn't yell. He would just tell the truth. And that would be enough. The week before graduation passed like a held breath. Lucas didn't talk much, but it wasn't the kind of silence that came from sadness. It was the kind that felt like waiting, like something inside him was taking shape. I didn't ask what it was. I just moved around him gently, giving him space to finish whatever he was building. Each day he followed the same rhythm. Up before sunrise, a quiet breakfast, long hours with his journal. He barely touched his phone. The house was still, and yet it felt full, like something important was happening quietly behind every closed door. I saw him pause sometimes in the middle of writing, like he was trying to hear a sentence that hadn't arrived yet. He never let me read what he was working on. I never asked. I knew better than to press him. Some things had to come out on their own terms. One night, I found him sitting out on the porch, his journal open, stars overhead. He looked so much like the boy who once asked if trees could feel sadness. I sat beside him, told him he didn't have to carry it all. He didn't look at me when he answered. If I don't say it now, when will I? I nodded, placed a hand on his back, told him then say it, all of it. We didn't speak again that night. We didn't need to. I understood, and he knew I did. The night before the ceremony, I ironed his gown and laid it gently across the couch. He walked past, gave me a small smile, the kind that never quite reached his eyes but always said thank you. I tucked a note in his pocket when he wasn't looking. Just one line, let them hear you. That morning, he came down the stairs looking taller somehow, like the weight he'd carried for years had finally turned into something solid. He wore his cap low, his tie perfectly knotted. I asked if he was ready. He said he was. I believed him. On the drive there, we didn't play music. We didn't talk much. Just watched the trees move past the windows in soft green blurs. I kept stealing glances at him, wondering how this boy who had once been overlooked by everyone was now walking into a room that would have no choice but to see him. We pulled into the parking lot. The sun was already high, bright against the rows of folding chairs set up outside the auditorium. I stepped out, smoothed my dress, and turned to help him with his cap. He didn't need it. He had already adjusted it perfectly. As we walked inside, I scanned the crowd. My breath caught. They were there, my father, Joel, Caroline, all of them dressed neatly, seated in the third row, as if they had been part of this, as if they had earned the right to witness it. I felt my stomach twist, but I said nothing. Lucas saw them too. I noticed the flicker in his eyes, that brief tightening of the jaw, but he didn't slow his pace, just kept walking, head up, shoulders back. I walked him backstage. The noise of the crowd faded as we stood in the quiet behind the curtain. I reached for his arm, he turned to me, and I whispered what I needed him to know. Whatever you say up there, I'm already proud. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes said everything. There was no fear, just purpose. I stepped back as the principal's voice echoed through the auditorium. My heart pounded. My hands trembled. But I stood still, because this moment wasn't mine. It was his. Lucas stepped onto the stage with steady steps and a quiet kind of certainty. His gown moved slightly with each breath, and from my seat in the fourth row, I could see the edges of his old journal peeking out from under his sleeve. He didn't carry a printed speech or cue cards, just that familiar notebook, the one he had filled over years of silence. The principal introduced him with numbers. GPA college acceptances, leadership roles. I barely heard any of it. I was looking at my father sitting stiffly beside Caroline. He didn't smile. He didn't clap. Just crossed his arms like someone watching a stranger. Lucas adjusted the microphone. The room was full, buzzing warm with pride and expectations. He started with what was expected. Thank you to the faculty, to his classmates, to the staff who made everything work behind the scenes. His voice was calm, clear, measured. Then he paused, just a beat longer than usual. That pause pulled the entire room into stillness. There are people in this room, he said, who didn't expect to see me here today. People who thought I wasn't worth the investment. That being from a broken home made me broken too. A hush fell over the auditorium. It wasn't shock. It was recognition. I heard a sharp intake of breath 2 rows behind me. Even Caroline shifted in her seat. My father stayed frozen. But I've learned something. You don't have to come from a perfect family to build a powerful future. You don't need applause to know your worth. He opened his journal. The pages were worn at the edges, some corners dog-eared. He didn't read fast. He let each sentence breathe. Some of us are born into applause. Some of us have to earn every single clap. It landed like a drumbeat. I felt it in my chest. I saw heads turning. A teacher near the aisle blinked hard and adjusted her glasses. The counselor who had once emailed me about his quiet leadership pressed her hand to her heart. I was told more than once that my mother failed me, that she couldn't give me what I needed. But they were wrong. She didn't fail me. She fought for me. She taught me how to stand tall without applause, how to work when no one was watching, how to believe in myself when the people who were supposed to believe didn't. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Every word landed because he said them with the kind of certainty you can only earn by surviving. Being from a broken home doesn't make you broken. It just means you have to build things from pieces. And sometimes the people who laugh at the glue under your fingers are the same ones who never learned how to rebuild anything themselves. The auditorium was completely still. You could hear breathing, nothing else. To anyone who's ever been told they don't matter, you do. To anyone who's ever felt like a shadow at the dinner table, you shine. And to anyone who was raised to shrink themselves for the comfort of others, stand up. A few people stood, then more, a wave, not loud, not chaotic, just a quiet, slow rising, like people finally recognizing something they'd been waiting to hear their whole lives. I didn't turn around to look at my family. I didn't need to. I felt their discomfort behind me, the weight of the truth pressed into the backs of their chairs. Lucas didn't bask in the applause. He didn't raise his hand or bow. He closed his journal, nodded once, and stepped off the stage the same way he stepped onto it. Quiet, steady, with nothing left to prove. He walked back to his seat without glancing into the crowd. He didn't need validation. He had already claimed what he came for. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, heart pounding. Not from nerves, from pride, from years of quiet injustice finally spoken aloud. When I glanced back, my father's expression hadn't changed. His arms were still crossed, his mouth a tight line. Joel stared at the floor. Caroline blinked quickly like she was deciding whether to pretend nothing had happened. But none of it mattered anymore. Lucas didn't deliver a speech. He delivered the truth, and it landed like thunder. The applause was still echoing when Lucas stepped off the stage and walked back to his seat. He didn't look for anyone. He didn't check to see who was clapping. He just sat down calm as ever, like nothing had changed, even though everything had. When the ceremony ended, the crowd spilled out into the warm afternoon. Families were hugging, taking photos, passing around bouquets. I watched Lucas move through it all with quiet grace. He didn't rush. He didn't shrink. He let people come to him. A teacher from his freshman year stopped us near the front steps. She said she had never heard a student speak like that. A man I didn't recognize. Maybe someone's father shook Lucas's hand and said he'd put something into words his daughter had never been able to. A group of students hovered nearby, waiting their turn, eyes wide, their hands holding programs like souvenirs from a moment they knew they'd remember. Lucas thanked each one with that soft half-smile of his. Never boastful, just present. I noticed Caroline walking quickly toward the parking lot. Joel followed behind her, eyes fixed on the ground. My father stood near the hedge, stiff and alone, his hands in his pockets. None of them looked our way. None of them said a word. Then they were gone. I didn't follow, I didn't wave. I just turned back toward Lucas and placed my hand on his back. It felt like the end of something, but not in a painful way. It felt like a door closing gently and finally staying shut. We left the school quietly, slipping past clusters of families still snapping photos. The sky was bright and full of light, and for once, it felt like that light belonged to us too. At the diner down the street, we slid into a booth by the window. No fancy dinner, no celebration photos, just pancakes, orange juice, and the kind of silence that feels earned. He didn't fold his napkin 3 times. He didn't scan the room like he was waiting to be forgotten. He just ate. It was the first time in a long while I saw him chew without tension in his jaw. I didn't say much, just watched him quietly, amazed by how full and steady he looked. Not loud, not triumphant, just whole. When the check came, he paid with his own money from the grocery store, slid the receipt across the table like it didn't mean anything. But it did. It meant everything. He looked out the window and said, almost like a thought slipping out, "I think I'm done shrinking." I nodded. I didn't need to say anything back. That night, I opened my laptop. The invitation emails I had sent to my family were still unanswered. No apologies, no congratulations, just silence. But I didn't feel bitter. I didn't feel hurt because they had been there, and they had heard it. Lucas didn't ask for revenge. He didn't demand approval. He just stood tall and told the truth. And in doing so, he claimed something bigger than applause. He claimed peace. We went to bed that night without talking much more. The house was quiet, but it wasn't heavy. It felt like space had finally been cleared for something new. And that was enough. Later that night, after the dishes were washed and the lights were low, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The house felt different, not louder, just more open, like something heavy had been lifted from the walls. I pulled up my email, scrolled through the old messages I had sent out to my family. Invitations, ceremony details, a photo of Lucas in his cap and gown. None of them had responded. Not then, not now. But the ache that used to follow that silence wasn't there anymore. I didn't feel small. I didn't feel left out. I just felt done. Not out of anger, just done waiting for love that had always come with a condition. Upstairs, I heard Lucas's door close gently. He had gone to bed without saying much, just that one quiet line on the walk back from the diner. "I think I'm done shrinking." I whispered it to myself like a prayer, like something I wanted to hold in my own hands. He didn't just write a speech. He didn't just survive the years of being overlooked. He stood in front of the people who had ignored him, and without raising his voice made them see him. Really see him. And the best part was, he hadn't done it for them. He did it for himself. I used to think that being the quiet one was a way to keep the peace. That if I smiled enough, folded the napkins just right, brought the pie, and said nothing, it would earn me a seat at the table. But now I see it clearer. The table was never the reward. The voice was. Lucas found his, and in watching him, I think I've started to find mine too. I shut my laptop, looked around the house that had held so much pain and quiet resilience. It felt different now. Not fixed, but freer. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't hoping anyone would call. I wasn't hoping for a message or a sudden apology, because we had already gotten what we needed. Lucas had been seen, I had been heard, and that was enough. If you've ever felt like the quiet one in your family, the one who kept the peace by staying small, I want you to know I understand. I spent years trying not to rock the boat, years folding myself into shapes that made others comfortable. And I believed for a long time that love had to be earned by silence. But what I've learned, what my son taught me in one unforgettable moment, is that silence is not the same as peace. That staying quiet to be accepted often means disappearing from your own life. And that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is speak, even if your voice shakes. You don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to fight to matter. Sometimes the truth is enough. Just standing in your own story and saying, "This is who I am." That is what changes everything. So, if you've been overlooked, ignored, dismissed, I hope you'll remember this. Being from a broken home doesn't make you broken. Being invisible doesn't make you weak. And being quiet doesn't mean you don't have something important to say. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is not loud. It's the silence you break with your truth. If this story made you feel something, share it. Send it to someone who needs to hear it. And if you've ever found your own voice the hard way, I hope you'll leave a comment and tell us, because your story matters too. And I'm listening.